My guest today is Jessica De Silva. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, attachment coach, and a podcaster. Today, we cover how to fix an insecure attachment style, the 4 attachment styles, and how they impact our lives, why it's important to know your attachment style, which attachment styles are the most compatible and most toxic, just why we repeatedly get into relationships with the wrong type of partner over and over, the impact of adverse childhood experiences on shaping our attachment style, how to spot others' attachment style, how to cultivate emotional intelligence, why you should have sympathy for bullies at school, and how the anxiously attached experience weddings. This episode is for everyone. Everyone has an attachment style. Even if yours is secure, it's useful to know and understand how others experience daily interactions with you. We all seek better relationships, and understanding attachment theory is a valuable tool. If you want to take a quiz to find out your attachment style, check out the link in the show notes. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jessica De Silva. Jessica, for those that aren't familiar with attachment theory, would you be willing to just give us an overview of the topic and why it's important?
Yeah, so we all have an attachment style. We can't escape this, right? So it's really important to understand how this mechanism works. But essentially, attachment theory is a psychological and evolutionary approach that helps us understand how we experience love, how we bond with people, how we relate with people, how we experience intimacy. And there's 4 different attachment styles. So there's the anxious attachment, there's the dismissive avoidant attachment style, there's the fearful avoidant attachment style, another name is disorganized, and then you have the secure attachment style. And essentially, these relationship styles or attachment styles, they were studied through, caregivers and their children back in like the 1960s. And what they discovered is that these attachment styles or relationship styles, they get carried into our adult relationships, which is why we kind of recreate the same similar dynamics that we experienced with our earlier relationship figures. So if we have insight around, how we're experiencing relationships and how we're experiencing intimacy, we can essentially have more control over these experiences and we can create more desired outcomes for our, emotional connections and intimate relationships.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Those 4, could
Yes.
you run through all of the 4 as well?
Yes. So let's start with the anxious attachment style. So, the anxious attachments, people that have anxious attachment style often need a lot of closeness and connection in relationships. They are often, characterized with needing a lot of reassurance and validation and attention. And when they experience relationship stress, they become highly activated, right? So their fight response gets activated and they just want to pursue the person. They want to pursue the connection. And that can often be very repelling sometimes to the person on the opposite end. That can be very sabotaging in relationships because they often don't know how to self regulate. So they're highly dependent on the other person to soothe. And then you have dismissive avoidance. So dismissive avoidance are often characterized by needing a lot of independence and needing a lot of autonomy within relationships. So this often comes from, feeling very neglected growing up, not really getting their emotional needs. So they became very hyper independent in order to do that. And they are often kind of linked with anxious attachments, which becomes kind of a very problematic relationship dynamic because, again, anxious attachments need that connection, whereas avoidant attachments really want their space and their autonomy. So it becomes this very like push pull dynamic. And then you have the fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment. That was my attachment style for most of my life. It's very complicated. It's very complex because you have both anxious and avoidant aspects to you. So, with the fearful avoidant, you often come from more severe levels of trauma. So, whether it was emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. So what happens is that it's very unpredictable. Well, you have a desire for closeness, but you also have a desire for autonomy and independence. You're often very distrusting of people, especially your intimate partners. And there's often this sense of like, I'm going to be betrayed, I'm going to be taken advantage of. So their behavior within relationships can be very complicated and erratic and unpredictable. And then you have the secure attachment. And this is something that we can all kind of move towards. And that's really the goal. And secure attachments, again, when you think of their earlier relationship dynamics, their needs were mostly met, right? So their caregivers did a really good job in attuning to their needs. It wasn't perfect because no parent is perfect, but there was a healthy level of attunement. So they often have really good self-regulation skills. They know how to co-regulate. They know how to connect to their feelings and needs. They have good communication skills and conflict resolution skills. So essentially, when you're learning to become more secure, or move from insecurity to security, it's essentially it's a mindset shift, and it's just learning these healthy tools to navigate relationships.
And do you think everyone should know their attachment style?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
I
Just
agree.
as everyone talks about, like what's your zodiac sign? I think that what's your attachment style would be a pretty important question to ask as well. Yeah.
I put it on the end of my online dating profile.
Do you really?
Yeah, I just put tell me your attachment style.
Kudos to you. I love it. And
Don't know
how
if
has
it
that
worked.
been?
How's it work? How's that working for you, Jason? Not very well.
Uh-huh.
Very occasionally I'll get someone who's like mega emotionally intelligent and they're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like they're so pleased.
Yeah.
Um, but my experience is when I get talking, if I get talking to someone who knows their attachment style is really into this sort of stuff, it never usually works out. Like I had an
Interesting.
experience of these types of girls. Maybe they're a bit similar to me because they're so
Mm,
interested in maybe the neurodivergent or whatever. And then like it'll be like back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Oh my God, you too! Wow. And it's like it's quite sparky.
yeah.
And then usually it'll just get a bit too much, and then they're like, "Oh, I don't know if this is going to work," and then they'll disappear. That's what those types of. I've had that happen a few times,
Interesting.
but yeah, I always bring it back to dating. I'm not meant to. I'm like, stop talking about dating. I like on all of my podcasts. Like I had someone the other week was a relationship expert, and I'm like, I'm not talking about dating. This is relationships, and then it
Right.
turned into like this whole like coaching session around dating.
Wow.
But I think my intention with the podcast is to be like vulnerable and totally open
Yeah.
and authentic. So you kind of have to like look at it through your own lens.
Yeah. Well, I'm
But
curious,
mhm.
Jason, what is your attachment style?
um it's definitely I did test again recently. Like I think I tested about a year ago, and then I tested again recently, and then I delved into like a little bit more of the detail. So it was like kind of anxious. Is it anxious, fearful towards my dad's side, and
Mm,
then kind of I'm one of the avoidant ones on mother's side,
interesting.
and then a little bit mainly anxious in general life.
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
so yeah, but see, this is the line I say right is I used to be anxious attached, but now I'm working towards secure attached. But that
Yeah.
now I don't know if my secure attachment is just avoidance in drag,
Mm,
which is
interesting.
yeah, which I think it was. Like anyone who listens to the podcast, I've mentioned this before, but I've gone into therapy. So we've been looking at like masks and stuff, and then I realized I'm like, hold on a minute.
Mm.
So my
Yeah.
secure, like I'm going to the gym, I'm absolutely smashing it in life, kind of like this it
Yes.
is like this wall of like, oh, I'm secure, but actually it's just like
Yeah.
it's like a protective mask, avoidant mask.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I often hear that kind of transition with people that fall more on the anxious spectrum is
Mm,
that sometimes, right, they've gotten so hurt and they're so fed up with kind of their behaviors that they become actually more avoidant. And you can tell because it's more of this attitude of like, I'm just not going to care. It's like
yeah.
this, I'm just going to focus on me. I'm not going to care. And that's not really always a secure approach.
No.
It's just, yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
dismissive sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Um,
It feels
but it's
safe though. Feels safe
it
and
does.
secure in my ivory tower or whatever you probably a wrong analogy. But yeah, it's this is why this stuff is so interesting
It is.
because
Yeah.
I didn't I honestly I didn't realize it, and then I was like, oh, hold on a minute. Um, but yeah, interesting. I mean, it'd be boring if I was secure.
I'm going to tell you, Jason, it takes, man, like I've been trying to do this work for, I don't know, the last 10 years or so. And it takes so much courage to be secure. It
Mm,
takes so much courage to like confront difficult situations and be vulnerable and like tune into what you're feeling and communicate what you're needing. Like it just takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of courage.
tap into that a little bit more for me. Like, give me some examples.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I just got out of a 7-year relationship. And I would say that that was probably my healthiest relationship that I've ever been in. Again, coming from the disorganized attachment style,
Hmm.
um, relationships were just always such roller coasters and very toxic, right? There was like this high intensity and passion, and then just the lows, like the lows of the lows, where you were just a hot mess. And I didn't want to
Yeah.
operate that way anymore. So when I learned about attachment theory, it gave me insight into wait, why do I do this? Why do I keep recreating these patterns? And I realized it was because I was so used to that inconsistency growing up, where I felt safe with my parents sometimes, and other times I didn't. Right? Sometimes they wanted to be with me, and other times they didn't. So I would find partners that kind of made me feel the same way.
Mm.
Anyways, going into the 7-year relationship, he was predominantly secure, but with avoidant tendencies because no one's perfectly secure attached or avoidant. No one's,
Is that right?
100% any
There
attachment.
is no perfect secure.
No.
I'm so happy about that. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's a little bit avoidant behavior, but I'm like those guys. Yeah.
That's so funny.
No,
Yeah.
but that's good to know, isn't it? It is good to know because I'm
Yeah.
like, who are these like really secure people? Because I don't know. I don't know if I've ever met one like
Yeah.
full that's not hot shown some traits. So it's good that you like. It's interesting that you say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Continue, please. Sorry.
Yeah. No, and I think that's important to consider too, because no one is perfect, right? There's no perfect human being that is
Hmm.
just never activated or stressed or feels anxiety. We all fall on a spectrum. So it could be that, you know someone or you date someone that maybe is secure, that maybe leans some avoidance, right? Or maybe they lean a little bit anxious. So that's just important to consider. But yeah, so where was I going with this conversation?
So we're talking about
With
yeah, like examples
security.
of how yeah, it takes courage to be secure.
Yeah. So anyways, going into this relationship, it really gave me an opportunity to practice how to be secure because and that's often when you date someone who does fall more secure, they're not going to take your bullshit, right? They're not going to let you overstep their boundaries. They're not going to be okay with you talking to them in cruel or derogatory ways, right?
Mm.
So when people kind of give you an opportunity to step up, it really does encourage you to, okay, wait, now I have to work on myself. I need to learn how to communicate properly. I need to be proactive versus reactive. I need to learn how to set my boundaries. I need to learn how to respect people's boundaries. So, studies often indicate that when you get into a relationship with someone who falls more secure, it gives you an opportunity to really practice those skills as well, because they're not going to tolerate often your inappropriate or your toxic behavior, if that makes sense.
Mm. So there's hope for us, yeah, on the insecure side, that we can get with a secure, and and then they can kind of help us, or we can,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay. And on that, so let's say someone's listening and would say they're secure. So let's look
Mm-hmm.
at those guys. I know I told them to fuck off a minute ago, but let's think about the secure people. So what about the secure people, and like they get with someone and then they're showing insecure traits? What are some things that they can do to help their partners?
Yeah. So are you speaking, what are things that the secure attachment can do to help their partner?
Yeah, so let's
Okay.
say, a guy's got with a girl and she's maybe jealous. And
Mm.
she's like, why didn't you text me when you went out with the guys for drinks or whatever? And he's like, well, I was just out with the guys. Or vice versa,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'm probably the other way around. Why don't you text me?
Yeah.
Catastrophizing.
Totally. Well, one of the things, yeah, that's a big one. So one of the things is, again, with secure attachments, they're often not people who fall more with secure attachment, right? They're often not so reactive initially. And that's really important when you're in any relationship, is to not be so reactive, right? So always approaching your partner from a place of calm, right? And providing that reassurance. So people that have secure attachments often can provide reassurance. They can help co-regulate. They're not going to be so defensive. They're going to be open to listening and validating, and then often can help the partner kind of regulate their nervous system. Whereas if it was another insecure attachment style, and this was my past, right? If I was jealous and came up, was super reactive, they became super reactive. And so that's just a hot mess, right?
Mm,
There's no resolution there. But often secure attachments, they can approach it with a lot more calm, which can kind of disarm their partner.
mm. And I guess it goes without saying, but if you are in, yeah, if you're in one of the, if you're avoidant or if you're anxious, it obviously makes sense to try and get with a secure partner rather than trying to match or do the opposite thing, which,
Yeah,
as you
yeah.
say, is more common.
Yeah, and that's the goal, Jason, right? Is to find a secure partner. But,
Yeah.
they say in studies that it's like 50 to 60% of the population in Western societies are secure. But I don't know like how accurate that is, because I find that there's a lot more insecure people that I've come across than secure,
Mm,
predominantly secure attachments. But yeah, essentially you do want to find someone that at least is aware of these tools and is practicing, these skills and how to regulate themselves and how to soothe, and, just someone who is attuned to these things and learning these skills, I think is essential.
mm. Yeah, that's emotional maturity.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you're anxious or avoidant, or I'm right in thinking it's those two are classed as the insecure styles, right?
Yeah.
So if you're one of the insecure styles, yeah, look for someone who knows maybe a little bit about this kind of stuff and is emotionally aware and intelligent.
100%. And there's things you can pick up on, like if you're dating, right? There's things that you can kind of initially pick up on to begin assessing someone's attachment style. Yeah.
And give me some examples.
Yeah. So, like if you're looking for someone secure, again, secure attachments, they're comfortable talking about their emotions, right? They're comfortable having difficult conversations, but they can also set boundaries and limitations. Whereas anxious attachment styles are often very big, like they share a lot, often like overshares. They might not, trust me, I can talk a lot as well.
Yeah. You're talking to the man who's broadcasting his thoughts to the world.
I do too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a constant battle.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also so beautiful. Like,
Mm.
again, attachment styles, they have, and I like to teach in this way too. You have such amazing strengths, right? Because you are so open. It gives other people the opportunity to be open as well and to relate and resonate. So there's beautiful strengths that come from this. It's just that with anxious attachment specifically, it's being attuned to your boundaries and the boundaries of others. Often that's kind of something that they have to work on, and that's something that you can pick up on too on a date, right? Are they pressuring me? Are they pushing me to do things? Or are they respectful of where I stand? Are they respectful of my approach to things? Whereas dismissive avoidance are a bit more closed off, a little bit more reserved. They might deflect. If you ask them questions about their past, they might not go into it, or they might like abruptly change the subject. Often using humor. Humor is a really popular way of just kind of deflecting. Yeah. And then you got the fearful avoidance, disorganized attachments, and they're just all over the place. Often they are very impulsive. They are very just like kind of unpredictable, very hot and cold. So yeah, just subtle things that you can kind of pick up on.
Yeah, I've come across just recently. I've come across more of that the disorganized attachment styles
Oh,
in like my interactions online. Obviously, I'm totally, what's the word? I'm diagnosing that, but I don't know for sure. But it seems that way. And what was useful for me is like as someone who like leans anxious, let's say like someone just totally doesn't message back for like a day, and then I'll be kind of like, hey, what's up? And then they'll be like, oh, sorry, I was just like doing this. And then like obviously like that that's clearly disorganized because it's kind of like in and out, and it's very unpredictable,
yeah.
as you say. And I think in the past I would have been like, God, I'm so needy. Like, this is
Mm.
me. I'm pushing her away. That's why she didn't speak to me for 24 hours. But having a handle on starting to understand these things, I was able to go, no, it's okay. That's literally her shit. Like,
Yeah.
so that was really empowering for me. Don't get me wrong. It's not ideal. It's not still not nice because you're like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. Um, But yeah, to be able to spot those patterns and just to realize that everyone has got their own shit to deal with, haven't they? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so if anyone's listening and kind of gets that feeling when they're getting left on red or whatever, it's what 9 times out of 10, it's something to do with them. Certainly if
100%.
certainly if it's someone who's actually been chatting to you and there's no signs and you haven't done anything ridiculous to like make them stop speaking to you, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I wanted to speak to you about, so the general theory of attachment is that it's in utero to 18 months is like the big years where it's set. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And usually, I mean, there's different schools of thought on this, but also like up to the age of 6, right? That's usually when, your mind is being shaped, it's being conditioned. So you're super susceptible to um, forming these different beliefs about love, about life, about relationships. So it's usually, it becomes kind of set in stone throughout those years. And then again, you're kind of reinforcing those belief systems throughout your life.
So the key term there being reinforcing. So, because I was wondering, because this is something I've been doing in therapy, and it's like,
Yeah.
uh, so I'm right. I used to have, I probably still do, like, have this fear of being cheated on.
Mhm.
And I used to, but I would never verbalize it. It's probably the first time I've actually really like mentioned it. Like a lot of like my ex-girlfriends probably didn't know.
Mhm.
Um, and see, for me, like on maybe most guys and most girls, they'll go, "Oh, I'm jealous. I'm a jealous person," or guys will say, "Oh, I'm a jealous
Mm.
prick." Like that's like, and so there's like some shame attached to that, right? So then we don't share it because the last time I said like you were out late last night or whatever because we don't know how to communicate it. And
Yes.
then they're like, what do you think, and then it starts this argument off of like you're jealous or whatever. Where is it going with this? So yeah, so understanding like that anxious attachment again was like, oh, okay, right, this is a thing. It's not
Yeah.
my fault. It's
Yeah.
just I'm like I've got this fear of abandonment.
Yes.
And so I've been looking at this and like, like why is that? And it's obviously hard to go back and try and find out where it was. And basically I've got to the point where the furthest back I could get was high school.
Mm.
A couple of relationships, like very like early relationships, like silly like 4 week ones or whatever, where like apparently like this girl had kissed someone else, but it still hurt
Yes.
me.
Of
Yeah,
course.
and it sounds silly,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
No.
Um, yeah, well, of course, yeah, it isn't silly, is it? But without the knowledge around this stuff, like we can think that, like, that was just at school, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I've been trying to figure out, like,
Where?
yeah, was it set in high school, or was there something previous to that I'm not
Yeah.
cognizant of?
Good questions. It can be shaped. So it's usually often shaped within our earliest attachment figures. So mom and dad or whoever raised you. But it can shift with different experiences. So, you know, like your 4 week relationships, or I mean, I had those too in elementary school
Mm,
where, you date someone for a month and then they start dating your best friend and
mm-hmm,
everything's fine. And you're supposed, but it's super painful. And that definitely shapes your beliefs. It can be traumatizing. It
mm,
really can. But I'm curious for you, Jason, like, so when you think of anxious attachments, right, with their parents, one or both caregivers. So, what's often seen is that they didn't really meet your emotional needs. Um, they were kind of inconsistent. They were inconsistent with meeting your emotional needs. So, sometimes, they gave you the attention. Sometimes they gave you that reassurance and love. And other times they didn't. Maybe because they were dealing with their own emotions. Maybe they had their own anxiety they were dealing with. And so you were often felt like, oh man, when am I going to receive this love? When am I going to get this attention? So
mm,
then you often go into meeting their emotional needs. Well, if I can make mom feel better, if I can make dad feel better, then they'll love me. Then they'll give me the attention that I want. So it's often with anxious attachments, one or both parents were kind of going through their own attachment issues or own anxieties where they felt kind of neglected and felt like I have to fix them. I have to be there for them. Therefore, I need to neglect my own needs in this moment.
mm.
I don't know if you experienced anything like that.
Yeah, and obviously, and it's worth like putting the caveat in here because I think sometimes when we talk about trauma and yeah, childhood trauma and things like that to the wrong person, like it might seem like we're trying to blame, but it's worth saying that that's not what it's about because
No.
it's don't be wrong, in some cases someone's been through some horrific trauma and the parents are to blame, if they've literally abused them verbally or physically. But like you say, it's how we responded to it So it might have been something
Yeah.
really small, right? So like really small, but just because of the way we are and how we reacted to it meant that it becomes like this thing that starts to shape
Yes.
us. So like I don't believe my mum and dad listen to the podcast, but like if they were, like that's not to like pass any blame, because all we're doing is everyone's just passing down the trauma to the next generation.
Yeah.
And like you and I are in this new time where this stuff is becoming common knowledge, and we can find it like through like amazing resources like your Instagram page, and this podcast and like other
Mhm.
things. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in there because I worry sometimes that the
Mm.
older generation might think that like millennials are trying to like blame them all the time for like, oh,
Mm.
this is my trauma. Yeah.
That's my mom.
Is
She's
it?
like, you just, yeah, she's like, oh, what else did I do? How else did I traumatize you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. That sort of inconsistency. And I mean, look, if you have like two parents who are working
Hmm.
full time, I can see so many examples on where a child would seem like they're not getting their needs met. Like, I don't know, they could be like, the phone rings or something, and the child's
Yes.
like they're wanting attention. Oh, hang on a minute, like the phone's ringing. And who knows? Like, it could be something like that, right?
Yes.
So
A hundred
it could be
percent.
something that you
Yeah.
just didn't even think about. And it's yeah, because we're not living on the savannah or in trees, and
Right.
we're not just able to be with each other all the time and constantly have this and I suppose like like in previous societies and not gatherers, maybe if that um phone rang, not a phone, but some, if there's another distraction, maybe grandma's there,
Yeah.
maybe, and we've got these
Yes.
big families. So yeah, I'm kind of like going on a little bit of a ramble here, but I was kind of like, I got an interesting insight into like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Well,
why.
that's how common it is. Yeah, like my mom, she had three kids. So
Hmm.
I was the oldest, and I got a lot of attention for about 4 years. And then both of my sisters came like 1 year after the other.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, all this love and attention that I was receiving was gone, right? Because she was distracted with being a single mother, working full time. My dad was out of the picture for a while.
Hmm.
So, of course, she couldn't tend to me. Like, of
Yeah.
course, she couldn't meet all of my needs. So, you end up, and I'm glad you brought this up because, yeah, you end up forming a lot of compassion and understanding
Hmm.
for why our parents could not attune to our needs perfectly all of the time.
Hmm.
It's just unrealistic to kind of expect that nowadays, especially nowadays, right? Where there are so many distractions and expectations.
Yeah. And I think like, I mean, I don't have kids. Do you have children?
No.
Yeah. And like, just, I mean, like, just like this thing, like your phone, I,
Yeah.
I, I think about, yeah, you see other parents, don't you? And the mum's on the phone and the kids there kind of
Yeah.
like trying to get attention. And then, so yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're starting to see some of the effects of that with this generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Which is,
go on.
yeah.
Yep.
No, I was going to say it's interesting because, in a sense, it's like we have all of this information now on how to be a better parent, right? We have all this information now on how to learn these tools, and everything's just, there's free information everywhere, which is wonderful because of these devices.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's also such a distraction as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's here to stay, isn't it? I suppose it's just managing that. But like, I suppose for you and I at the moment, if we get addicted to our phones or whatever, it's just us. It's messing up. It's not messing up anyone else.
My God. And it adds to the anxiety, Jason. Like, holy moly. It's I hate it. I personally hate it. I
What,
really do. It makes me
social
so
media, or
anxious.
just the idea of?
Yeah, just the social media, and then you have all this access to what people are doing, and then you're tempted to want to see what they're doing, and
Hmm.
like who did they follow and who did they talk to? It's like it's just it's just unnecessary, and I don't think we're supposed to have this kind of access and
No,
information. I don't think it's helpful
no.
at all.
Yeah, like in the last few years, like Instagram is just like, for me, yeah, it shapes so much of how I feel throughout the day, which is wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because you'll just notice like a certain day. Tell you what's a bad what like a few weekends ago. It's very dull here in the UK, so we don't get very much weather, nice weather. And the other weekend, we got some really nice weather at the weekend. At the weekend, yeah. And I had to stay in and do some editing on the podcast. So I'm editing, and then maybe I'll have a little break, look at my phone, and I've maybe put out some content that day. No likes. And then, so I'm like, I'm stuck indoors feeling like Cinderella.
Oh my god. I'm picturing this
Yeah.
perfectly.
But you know what
Uh-huh.
it's like when you're working quite hard. It's quite nice to have a little look at the phone, little
Yeah.
dopamine hit. Oh, someone's messaged me or whatever. It's kind of like, okay, now back to work. And then we kind of like, oh, there's nothing. Okay, back to work. And then you're like, it's beautiful sunshine outside. I'm feeling a little bit FOMO. And then
Mm.
like because of that, because everyone's out enjoying themselves, so they're not on the phones, which is really nice. But then if you're the person who's on your phone that day, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, a whole other thing. And then later on, and then at like 9 o'clock when it's going dark, and then I'm finished, and then everyone's posting the pictures, and then I get even more FOMO. I don't know how we got into
Yeah.
to social media.
Well, yeah, the distraction. Well, I lost my phone on
Oh
Friday,
yeah,
last Friday.
was it
Lost my
lovely? Was it
phone.
beautiful?
It was actually
Hmm.
beautiful. It was very anxiety inducing in the beginning because again, it's like our phone nowadays, like humans are needs driven, right? We're needs driven, and so we meet a lot of our needs, like our emotional psychological needs, through our freaking phone.
Hmm.
And so I was lost at first. I was like, oh my god, where do I get my need for validation? Where do I get my need for connection and attention?
Yeah,
And I'm like, Jessica, go outside and take a freaking walk.
yeah,
Go to your sister's house, go to the beach. So there's other ways we can meet our needs, but we've been depending on our devices to do that, and our social media accounts.
yeah, yeah. It's not easy, is it? But it sounds like simplistic, but it is worth reminding yourself like how nice it feels not to have the phone. It's like, yeah, just like, I think like if you can do like maybe like at least 3 hours, like maybe
Mm,
3 hours once a week of just like, whether it's a walk or anything else, we've not got your phone, and just
yeah.
you like do decompress. And
Mm,
I suppose it depends as well on how like attached you are to the device as to as to how that
hmm.
time works out for you. But for me, like as someone, I do use my phone a lot. Like I feel like 3 hours is about right to kind of, there's like the initial kind of like, oh, where's it at? And then
Well,
until you
yeah.
realize it's not there, and then you kind of like you're able to
Wow.
just enjoy it. But yeah.
Yeah.
So how did
Yeah.
talk to me about your work in a practical sense? Like how do you get interested in attachment theory, and like what led you down this journey?
Yeah. So my background is in marriage and family therapy. And I was doing therapy for a few years. And I want to say, like, it was in grad school that I learned about attachment theory, but we touched on it so briefly that it's interesting. But I kind of delve further into attachment theory again in that 7-year relationship and in just, in my practice in general, because I was noticing, okay, there's a lot of repetitive behaviors here. What is going on? Like, why are we repeating these relationship dynamics? So that's when I, started reading more about attachment. Of course, there's the, famous book Attached by Amir Levine that I know I highly suggest for people to start with that. Diane Poole Heller also has amazing resources on attachment. And anywho's, so through that, just understanding my own relationship dynamics, right? How do I break my own patterns? Because I want to keep this healthy relationship. I don't want to, revert to my old ways of operating. Yeah, and it was really from there. And so I started my coaching practice, because therapy is beautiful. I mean, I work with my own therapist, but it's very process oriented. You can kind of stay in therapy for years and years and years, which is wonderful to have that kind of support. I'm much more like problem solving, action oriented. Like, I know what my problem is. Tell me what to do now to change it. I don't want to focus on my past too much. Like, I just want to learn the tools to create these new habits. So coaching is a bit more action oriented in that approach. And that's how I went into that space specifically.
Okay. And what about partners who partners have access to each other's phones? This is something I've been thinking about. And they they both have access, so they can just check that nothing's going on. And like, I've seen this a few times, and it's kind of like, yeah, it's because we're so trustworthy, and like, we just give we just give them both access, and they'll kind of be on each other's phone. And I've seen it in like a couple of relationships, and I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. Like, yeah, I just wondered if you've come across
Yeah.
that, and like what's going on there, and yeah, is that a bit of a red flag?
I mean, it doesn't have to be a red flag if both people have consented that that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's fine. Like, I've seen that kind of, I've seen that agreement in some relationships, and both people are essentially pretty secure enough that they're like, yeah, I mean, you can access my phone and have my passcode, that's fine. So I think it really depends on the context. Whereas if it's more of like a forceful experience, like, I need to have your phone to check it to make sure that you're not cheating on me. Like, what exactly is the intention, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just that we have access to each other's phone in case of emergency, or, just to have access to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If my phone isn't around.
Mm-hmm.
But if the intention is to like snoop and, see what the other person is doing, then that's where it's coming from, more of like the insecurity and the fear.
Yeah,
And can be more
like
harmful.
I like my past relationship, like my girlfriend, she had like a thumbprint on there just so she could use it, but it wasn't like she would go through it. So and that worked actually really well because I had nothing to hide, so it wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I've just seen it sometimes where like the partners are always on it, and I'm like, like yeah, it seems like
Yeah.
a bit much.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, they're trying to
Yeah.
like portray it as like it's all about trust, but yeah, there's some
But
slight, yeah,
uh-huh.
strange behavior going on. What would you say snooping is? What's the like? I guess it's anxious, isn't it? Falls
Yes.
into that.
Yeah. So often, yeah, like when I see more of, or when I work with clients, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
right, who have more of the anxious attachment style, they're usually the ones that are more inclined to snoop, because again, they need reassurance, right? They need a lot of reassurance. So one way of reassuring would be to look in the phone.
Mm.
So it could be that if you're, if you have, friends that are like this and they fall more on the anxious spectrum, they might want access to the phone in order to kind of meet the need for reassurance. That could be something too.
Mm. And like when you're working with what type of clients do you work with? Is it mainly just one-on-one? Like is it a mixture?
Yeah. One on one, but I do work with some couples too, but it's mostly one on one.
How does
Yeah.
that work with the couples? That's interesting.
I know. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. I think it's actually probably best that couples work together because then they both are on the same page about what is going on,
Mm,
right? So if one person is implementing these tools, the other one's more receptive to it because they know that, okay, we have to do this
yeah,
in order to make the relationship work.
yeah.
So being on the same page is really, really helpful.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what are those the sort of the tools that you would recommend for like the typical couple that maybe they have like the sort of like very common issues that you might see, such as jealousy. I don't know, fill in the blank. You know more than me in terms of, yeah. Yeah, let's tap into that. Like, what are some of the other than that sort of because I all I can think of is jealousy. What are the other ones that show up in relationships, like the key?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, jealousy is a really big one, but it's often, again, it's always rooted to the fear of abandonment, right? It's often rooted to the fear of abandonment, or when anxious attachments aren't getting quality time, or they're not getting attention, or, they're just not getting the connection that they're looking for within relationships. It can be very triggering and activating for them, which causes them to become very like excessive in
Mm-hmm.
relationships and very demanding in relationships. And that's when their often avoidant partner tends to pull away and tends to need a lot more space and becomes a lot more dismissive. So that's usually when they come to therapy or coaching, is to kind of navigate that dynamic. But, what is really helpful is for them to understand their attachment needs.
Mm,
So not just, why they are the way they are, but also what they're needing to feel safe and secure in relationships. So, anxious attachments, again, they have psychological and emotional needs for connection. I want to be in tune with you. I want to know how you're doing. I want you to ask me how I'm doing. Like, let's talk about our emotions. Let's connect in that way. Let's spend time together. I want to feel like you're really tuning into me, and vice
mm,
versa. Avoidants want to feel understood. Avoidants often want to feel understood. They want to feel respected. They want to feel like they are good enough in relationships. They want to feel seen. They want patience. They want kindness. So, again, it's just kind of really understanding what their individual needs are and finding ways to meet in the middle ground, right? How can we both attune to each other in this way?
mm,
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it's not enough for each other. Sometimes people aren't capable of meeting the needs for the other person. And other times, they try, they take the steps, but I'm going to tell you, Jason, it takes a lot of work.
mm,
When you are in a relationship with someone that's operating from very different needs, it's like you are learning a new language. You're learning a new language. So you're not going to get the words right. It's going to take a lot of time to become fluent. You're going to need, reminders. You need a lot of patience from your partner. It requires a lot of work, but it's doable.
mm. And what about? I'm just trying to think like of an example where, like in my last relationship, I would say because I'd not really done much work, but my ex partner had done a lot of work and
Mm.
was more attuned with like emotional intelligence and sort of like and I would feel at times like um a little intimidated by like not knowing, if that makes sense.
Mm.
I just wondered like how can people like navigate those waters if they feel like at odds, if they feel, what's the word, like if they feel like their partner is like more ahead of them in the emotional intelligence thing and then they can't,
Yeah.
I suppose educating them doing this sort of thing um is the first step, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just, I think it's, acknowledging it, acknowledging where you are, seeing it as an opportunity to, okay, wow, this is something that I want to learn about. This is something that I want to explore more within myself, right? So often when I work with people that have avoidant attachment, they are very like logical, but they're not so connected to their emotional world. So in doing, coaching sessions with them, it's really just helping them begin to identify, what am I feeling?
Mm.
Why am I feeling this way? Ooh, what do I need to feel better in this moment? So once they start to develop a relationship with their feelings and needs, that's how they start to become more emotionally aware. And if they cultivate that language with themselves, they can better communicate what they're feeling and needing with their partner, as opposed to just running away
Mm-hmm.
or self soothing. They can actually begin to connect and co regulate. So I always tell clients, like, if you can learn anything, begin asking yourself those three questions. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What do I need to feel better? What would make me feel better?
Mm.
It's so important.
That's a good one. Yeah. That last one. What do I need? And
Yeah.
yeah, I suppose it's probably sometimes the first thing to go out the door for a lot of people. They don't really consider it because they might feel guilt or
Yeah. Or Jason, I mean, this might be totally sidetracking too, but rather than connecting to their feelings, they just go to their phone,
mm,
right? Oop, feeling uncomfortable. Let me just distract. So there's no way to cultivate emotional intelligence if you're resorting to distractions immediately, right?
yeah. I suppose as well, like having a mindfulness practice or some form of meditation as well is going to help with that.
Yeah.
Like to people who maybe haven't heard that before, they'll kind of think, "Oh, really? Why?" But it's like that being able to notice that space where here is a feeling I don't like, and like you say, pick up the phone, because how many
Hmm.
people will do that and they have no idea that they're doing it. I would
Yes.
ascertain that it's probably the majority of people. Because I I even
Yeah.
do it when I know I'm doing it, and I'm like, like I want to pick up my phone. Then I get like a little fear, and I go, little discomfort there, Jason. What's all that about? And I
Yeah.
go, fuck off. I'm still picking it up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just easy. It's easy. It's so easy and convenient. That's why I said, learning to become secure, it just takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more effort because you're changing these habits.
Mm,
Um, you know, it's easy to just pick up your phone and distract yourself and make the feeling go away or suppress the feeling in that moment. But to ask yourself those questions and sit with your feelings and try to meet your needs in healthier ways, I mean, that exerts a lot more energy
yeah, I
from you.
suppose like yeah, uh, working towards secure attachment. I suppose you could actually. It's like 1,000 new habits to learn, isn't it? So
Yes.
or 1,000 different jujitsu moves or whatever. Like, what am I going to do in this scenario?
Yes.
I get this thing, so okay, right, I need to learn that one. Okay, and that's a little, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never really thought of it like that. I got a bit of an insight there. You're just learning all the different moves, and
Yes.
yeah, and being aware of like what are the possible things that I could be confronted with, and then learning how to
Mm-hmm.
respond correctly. And like
A hundred
the phone
percent.
is a real good example. Obviously, it's somewhat abstract because it's about a phone, but it's about realizing rather than avoiding your feeling that you feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
recognizing it in the moment, sitting with that feeling,
Yes.
allowing it to dissipate or allowing it to be there,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and probably it was dissipate after some time. Would we say that
Mm-hmm.
is a secure act? Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it could also be too, because remember that your feelings are always going to guide you to your temporary needs. So it could be that your feeling is telling you, hey, there's a physiological need for water, food,
Mm.
shelter, right? Go outside and walk, breathe. Or your feeling is telling you, hey, Jason, you spent a lot of time by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, go talk to a friend, go connect with
Mm-hmm.
somebody. So there's healthy ways to meet these needs where we actually do connect with people and we have a meaningful conversation, or we hug somebody, or whatever it is, hug our dog, and we feel the need, feel a connection and the attention there. Or there's unhealthy ways of meeting our needs where maybe we feel the discomfort and we immediately go to our phone, or we feel the discomfort and we focus on work and focus on hobbies. But again, those things, there's a fine line, because that can sometimes be unhealthy if we're doing it excessively,
Mm-hmm.
right? So other distractions can be work, other distractions can be hobbies. um, so where are you meeting these needs and not balancing it out with real connection, with real closeness and intimacy and vulnerability?
Mm. Yeah, it's I had this conversation. I had a conversation recently with uh, one of my guests, and we disagreed on this. And she's on OnlyFans. This is what we're talking about, and we were having like
Oh.
a philosophical discussion around like pros and cons, and how um arguments for OnlyFans being that it's maybe more safe than traditional like sex work, and then we were sort of like unpacking, well, is that what are the downsides, what are the costs, is it a service, what are the effects on um let's say men and having access to this sort of thing. And then she brought up like uh, I don't know if she brought it up, sorry, or whether it was me, and we're talking about how like what is the trigger, is the trigger like pain, and then you're like, oh,
Mm.
I'm feeling pain, so then okay, I'm gonna watch porn or something like that. And we're having this
Mm.
discussion around, well, I would argue that's a negative behavioral pattern. Like, you shouldn't be, yeah, it could be problematic to be
Mm.
reaching for that sort of thing when in a negative state of mind, just like it is with alcohol or any other addictive
Mm-hmm.
behavior. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just weird. I mean, obviously, it's slightly abstract from what we're talking about, just but I feel like it links into what we were talking about in honoring the emotion
Right.
rather than
Right.
rather
Yeah.
than like constantly going for the distraction. But yeah, it's a minefield, but I think everyone's got to do the work, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing, too. It's like, I believe in like everything in healthy balance as well, right? It's like sometimes, I will have a need for, I just want to relax, and I'll grab a glass of
Mm-hmm.
wine and relax, or maybe I'll have a drink and
Mm-hmm.
relax. But if I'm
Mm-hmm.
always right, if I'm forming a habit where every time I'm feeling this way, I have to grab that drink, or I have to look at porn, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is that your
Mm-hmm.
behavior is, that's when it becomes excessive. That's when you're not really attuning to your emotional needs. But if, you do it once in a while and it's not really hurting you or anybody, that's fine too. It's not to like totally restrict yourself, but
Yeah.
there is always a fine line. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, watching those patterns, and if it's becoming like if it's becoming a habit, then
Yeah.
then it's something to consider. Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. What is love addiction?
That's I guess that kind of falls with kind of what we've been talking about, right? It's again, it's man, I feel like I'm love addicted. I feel like that's been my entire
Yeah.
life, to be totally honest. Yeah. And I think that kind of falls with, you see this more with the anxious attachment. If you have more of the
Mm-hmm.
anxious attachment style, you fall more in that spectrum. And again, it's It's when you have made a habit to meet your emotional needs, your psychological needs through the other, right? So there's this level of codependency. There's this level of you will make me happy. Love will make me happy. There's this like
Mm,
idealization and pedestaling love and pedestaling a partner. So I think that when we have created this dependency where someone else, where love, where a relationship is going to give us value, it's going to give us meaning, it's going to make us happy, that's where we can kind of become addicted,
hmm.
right? To eating that need in that way.
Yeah, because it's like it's literally kind of like keeping you going. Your all of your
Yeah.
energy is coming from the other person, and yeah, and I mean it's crazy as well when you think about like how we've grown up as well, and look at like pop culture and pop music especially, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
you listen to like all these songs now, and you're like serious attachment issues going on.
Yes.
Right, like you know, like I need you, like that must be like I need you is probably must be like the one of the most
Yeah.
common things ever
Yeah.
in songwriting. um
Yeah.
and there's so much of it, isn't it? And like we look at, like certainly for me as well, like rock stars and the Rolling Stones and all these bands and the Beatles, and they were like my heroes. And you
Yeah.
look up to them as like these gods, and then but then the messaging like that we're picking up on like subconsciously in a lot of these stuff are like like extremely toxic in some, you know, in some
Yeah.
examples, and then just like hugely needy and just like,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
But I guess like,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess maybe that's changing. I'm not that familiar with like modern day like music, but I don't know whether they're all like talking about doing ice baths and yoga. Talking
Yeah.
about the
Well,
setting the
nowadays,
boundaries. Sexy.
yeah. 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 I don't know. I feel like music a lot of days now is like very derogatory in a sense towards I just get the sense towards like women in general now. It's like you're just kind of treated as a commodity in a
Really?
way. It's not very, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, growing up, just watching Disney
Mm-hmm.
movies, which added to the love addiction, right? Where it's like a prince is going to save me. Right? A man is going to save me. I can't, I'm going to wait for him. And it's like you romanticize relationships, you idealize these relationships. And then when I actually got into a secure relationship, I realized no, like it is not about that. I actually have to be an independent person in this
Mm,
relationship. My prince or my whatever, my prince is not a perfect person. He's gonna upset me. He's gonna let me down. And this sucks,
mm-hmm.
right? And so man, it's like once you realize the reality of a relationship, you're just like love is just it's a brutal awakening, Jason.
Mm.
It's a brutal awakening when it's not what you expected. It's not this fairy tale, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. That's a much more realistic view of the world. And I guess all things like seem to boil down to expectations as well. Like what are your expectations in life, what are your expectations in love. And I think having that sort of
Yeah.
from the outset, like, want to get married because it's going to be like all like magical and stuff. But like, no. If you want to get married, it's going to be tough.
No.
It's going to be loads of
Yes.
compromise. You're going to have to be incredibly intentional. You're going to have to, have each other's backs, all this sort of stuff. And I suppose, this is nothing new. Like we hear this a lot, but it really is true. And I think so many people
Yeah.
fall into, like I say, this love addiction, this like, because it's so it's such a rush, isn't it? Like if you are on the insecure attachment style as well,
Yeah.
um yeah, It's well, they say love is a drug, right?
Yeah, I actually made
Did
a
you?
poem back when I was 16 years old. It was love. Yeah, I was like, "You are my drug." I think it was titled "You are my the drug I love to take." The drug I love to take.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah, so I feel ya.
What about loneliness? Like how do the different attachment styles like respond to loneliness?
Mm, yeah. I feel like loneliness is such an epidemic, even more now these days. Um, yeah, I feel like there's been a huge shift in that. But, often, again, avoidant attachments, right? If you're fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, they're often pretty comfortable with the
Mm,
loneliness, right? So, they like to be on their own. They like their space. They like their autonomy. So they're often pretty comfortable in that place. Whereas people that fall more on the anxious spectrum, or if you're fearful avoidant, leaning more anxious, loneliness can feel very difficult. It's very challenging because, again, you have more of a need for connection and closeness and proximity. So it can be a lot more challenging for those of us that have more of the anxious attachment.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can it's interesting you were saying that and I was thinking about I was like I quite like being on my own and then I'm like but then there's the other times when I'm like
Yeah.
and then I'm like oh yeah
Yeah.
that's that anxious avoidant dance
Yes.
that
A
that's
hundred
going on and I feel
percent.
like for me I'm like probably can be like lean into avoidant when I'm like high energy, confident, and going through life, and then like yeah, and I've probably repeated myself there, but I'm just doing it for myself. But yeah, and then easier to fall into those anxious modes.
Yeah.
How do you feel like on your own? As which one of you? You're the
Good question.
disorganized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Disorganized. So that was my attachment style. Yeah. For most of my life, I'm actually exploring
Mm-hmm.
this now because I've been single for, I don't know, almost 5 months
It was quite
now.
fresh.
So
So I'm sorry to hear
it's
that, by the
quite
way.
fresh. Oh,
7 years.
it's part
Yeah,
of
I
life.
did a 7-yearer. There's something about that. Yeah, I did a
Wow.
7 and a 3. With the they're my
Yeah.
anyways, continue. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. No, it's tough. It really is. The detachment
They
process is
say though,
really
don't they? They
hard.
say they they isn't there this thing around in 7 years all of your cells were
Yes.
replaced, so you're a completely different
Yeah.
person. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I feel like a hundred
Do you not?
percent
Okay.
different. Uh, to some extent, yeah, but I don't know. But yeah, I heard about that in terms of like the
Mm-hmm.
7 year cycle, where usually it takes 7 years and then that chapter is closed. And
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think there's a TED talk on that, and I think
Mm-hmm.
there's one that talks about how your cells changed, and I think there's another version that's a bit
Yeah.
more kind of pragmatic and just like we just seem to go through these cycles in life, like
Right.
they talk
Right.
about the bullies at school when they come out of school, they go from being top status to like the lower, like
Oh.
that they usually struggle because they come out as
Yeah.
they've gone through school having all this status and kind of and yeah and then they leave and then they've got nothing, like all their status is just taken away from
Yeah.
them.
It's true. I've
Yeah,
seen that in
and
some
then how
people.
many people do you know the other end of the spectrum who are like really quiet, shy,
Hmm.
geeky, intelligent, and then they go to uni and then like they're just like
Hmm.
they totally just take off and then they start to get more confident because they meet people like them. And then like
Mm.
but then the beautiful thing is it crosses over again. So like they say that like the bullies who
Yeah.
maybe had 7 hard years then they like reinvent
Mm.
themselves you know, when they're maybe in their mid-20s, and then they're kind of like they've had time to reflect. And um
I like that approach. I haven't heard
yeah,
it in that
it's
way.
so
Yeah, that's
interesting.
beautiful.
But I'm so fascinated
Hmm.
by that. Like I know you know, a few people from school who are kind of like the sort of like the bully types, and I see them about now, and a lot of them are like totally different people. And I sort of like, I almost, you know, I kind of want to talk to them. Like, I feel bad for them because I think people will always think of them as the
Mm,
bullies. Do you know what I mean? Like, and obviously, yeah, you've got to feel bad for the people who were bullied as well. Like, that's obviously, but no one talks about actually. What about the bullies? Like,
right.
they've like,
Yeah,
I
no.
know that
Right.
like they were dickheads at school, but they've probably had some serious trauma, and then they're like, and they'll have had
Hmm.
like the rest of. Actually, something I was in the sauna the other day, and this guy comes in, and I was like, "You all right?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, God, yeah, feeling quite smug." I'm like, "Oh, right, what? Why?" And he's like, "Well, someone who was one of my bullies at school just found out he's gone to prison." And I was like, "All right," and he was like. And I didn't know what to do with that information. And I was kind of like, what, are we, like celebrating? Like, it just sounded like really sad to me. I was like, oh, wow, right, he's gone to prison. And then I saw him like going, I think this kid was like pretty neurodivergent. And I seen him talking to someone else, just like this old lady in the pool. And she's like, oh, that's good. I'm like,
Oh
it's
my
not good.
goodness.
Like, that's like someone's life. And I mean, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I'm not going to get many people onto this, are they? Like, sympathy for the bullies.
Yeah.
I won't get making any t-shirts
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. No, but coming from an attachment lens, right? It's again, it's how are you relating to people? I'm sure those bullies probably have insecure attachment styles because of, how they were treated and how they learned how to relate to people and get their needs met. I have to bully people and be mean to feel validated, right? So it's again, it's you can kind of have compassion that we're all human and we're all just trying to get our needs met. And a lot of us did not learn how to meet our needs in healthy
Mm,
ways. But as an adult, it is your
yeah,
responsibility, right, to learn to meet those needs in healthier ways.
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's I don't know if it's a Seneca thing or a Marcus Aurelius. I think it might be Seneca. And it's like I'm going to completely like ruin this quote. Yeah,
Butcher
butcher
it.
it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, it says something like we need to be like rigorous with our own, but like compassionate with like others,
Ooh,
which is
interesting.
like it's probably a good way to show up, right? This is just what we're talking about. It's like we've got our own shit, let's
Yeah.
but also be forgiving and compassionate towards others. Because also, if you're anything other than compassionate, all it's going to do is cause you pain, anyways. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
think that what by us being avoidant or like aggressive or like this is going to help the situation
Yeah.
is like you take
Yeah.
all of the energy out of that of a bad situation by
Right.
just being like, oh, compassion. Like, I'm really sorry that person is
Yeah.
in this much pain, so that they're acting towards me like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
being able to practice it in the real world is not always easy in the moment. That's what a journal's
No,
for.
we have to have so much. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been learning so much compassion, like just having so much compassion for myself because changing your habits, it is a lifelong process. It gets easier, but I mean, it's a daily practice. It's a daily practice. It's a
Mm,
lifestyle. Yeah.
absolutely. What do you think about weddings?
I'm assessing that right now. So you asked the original question about the
Hmm.
loneliness, right? And I've been pondering that a lot. Thinking about, marriage, like would I want to get married again? Is that something that
This isn't a proposal, by the way.
to be total
Just
no, no.
clarifying. What do you think about marriage, Jessica?
Yeah. Wow, Jason, is this your anxious attachment style?
Yeah, I know what I'll do. I'll
That's so funny.
propose.
I think that just comes to like your own thoughts and subjective beliefs on it. I think marriage is beautiful. I love the aspect of commitment and stuff. In that way, I think it's really subjective for everybody. But when I'm looking at it from an attachment style lens, I think that, looking at it from a secure perspective, I think that it could be a beautiful covenant and commitment, as long as both people are on the same page about things. But I'm still giving thought to this, so I can't really answer the question perfectly because I don't even know what my take is on that 100% just yet.
Yeah, I was a little bit mean there. I didn't actually give you like the full context of my question, but I just dropped the what do you think about marriage?
Oh.
But I was actually wondering as well, what do you think about the wedding ceremony or the wedding party and attachment styles? Like, so I'll give you some more context.
Yeah.
When I used to drink, I used to misbehave at weddings quite badly. But I'll own up to that
Oh,
now.
no.
And, I've done my apologies and stuff. Yeah, it's bad. And so weddings have really shaped a lot of like my life. Like I've had some really bad weddings. I've had some really good ones. And so now when I go to weddings, I'm always kind of like analyzing the room and looking at it's just such an interesting thing, like when you look at it through the lens of attachment, because like the bride and groom are like ordaining status throughout the like so you've got like the best man, you've got the bridal part, you've got the what do we call it, maid of honor, all that sort of stuff, and then like in the room you've literally got like whoever's closest to the top table is like higher in status, and then it goes down. And I started noticing some traits within like members of my family, and like alcohol and like this attachment thing. And I have a bit of a theory around like so if you're anxious attached and you go to a wedding and you're not like either the groom, the bride, or like the maid of honor or the best man, you're like looking for evidence that you're not loved throughout this whole thing. Yeah, so it's like
Okay.
so I just wonder, so I wonder if that's something like you come across with like anxious attachment, and it makes me think about like how our attachment styles aren't just related to our romantic relationships, but how they can show up in other areas. Like, can it, show up with them, with teachers and tutors and your gym coach
Oh,
and like
yeah.
all these other like figures of authority. I just found it interesting, and as someone who has that like response to things like weddings, I think to myself, I'm like, oh my god, like if I ever get married, I wouldn't want to like do that to anyone. I wouldn't want to like say, hey, this is the person like I love the most, or like, do you know, like out of your friends. So I'll end up like just inviting everyone. Everyone could be a groomsman.
That is so funny. Yeah.
Try living it. But
Yeah. 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 So that's an interesting. Okay, so if you put it in that context, so again, it's your perspective on the situation, right? So if you have more of the anxious attachment, I can see how you would be overly concerned, right? Because anxious attachments are overly concerned about how other people are going to feel. How are they going to feel? Are they going to be mad at me? Are they going to be hurt? Am I going to hurt their feelings? So if you pick one person, anxious attachments are going to experience a lot of anxiety around, oh my God, are other people going to feel sad? Right? So it's this there's a lot of overthinking and a lot of worry with that experience about how other people are going to feel. Avoidant attachments, honestly, like, I don't think they give much thought to it. When it comes to weddings, they're usually like, I don't want to deal with this. So again, they're just more, problem solving, logical with things. I don't think they really think too much about the emotional aspect of that. Whereas secure attachments, they might have some concern about how it would maybe make other people feel, but I don't think that they are going to be highly emotional about it either. I think that they might approach it just more realistically and from a traditional standpoint, as opposed to, oh my God, I don't want to let people down and feel really anxious in regards to that. So yeah, I think the attachment style can definitely impact the way you're perceiving the situation. Right. Um, yeah. Does that
Yeah.
answer your
Yeah, no,
question at all? Okay.
absolutely. It's just it just shows up everywhere, doesn't it? It's so interesting,
Yeah.
and this is why like it's such important work that you're doing. And I mentioned before, like um your page is like so well done, by the way. So I'm going to link
Thanks.
it up in the show notes and stuff. But so many resources in there, and the way that you play out these different like the scenarios, and this is how like the anxious will respond. I just think is done really well. So yeah, I'm really in
Thanks.
admiration of your work. So thank you for this
Thank
today.
you.
What's the future look like for you in terms of your professional work? Have you got anything in the pipeline?
Yeah. So I don't know if I should talk about this just yet, but yeah, I do have
Hmm.
some projects coming up. I guess I might as well just put it out there in the universe that I am in the process of writing a book,
Wow.
which has always been my goal, but I think it's still going to be in the realm of self-help, but I'm going to tie it more into my experiences because I've had so many relationship
Hmm.
experiences that I feel can I feel like people really relate to
Yes.
story, right? Like when they hear your story, people really resonate and relate to it. It's super vulnerable. As you know, it's like we're big
Hmm.
oversharers, but the amount of feedback I get that, with people saying, "Hey Jess, man, I heard about your breakup. I heard about your story with this or that. I can so resonate. Thank you so much for giving me clarity
Hmm.
on this." I mean, that to me is worth it. Like, sure, I'll share my
Yeah.
story. I don't care. So I think, anyways, yeah. So I'm in the process of writing a book in the future. So that's kind of my goal at the moment.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Is there like books out there at the moment that sort of like have attempted to that have done like what you're thinking about through like an attachment lens stroke autobiographical, if I've got that right?
There is one book, and I'm blanking on her name. I think her last name ends with Moore. I'm totally, it's spacing, but no, I have not read any books that has to do with someone's personal,
Mm-hmm.
aside from this one. Anyways, her last name ends with Moore, I'm pretty sure. But no, all of them are very like
Yeah.
scientific based, like case study based, but none of them from like a personal
Mm-hmm.
experience where they're intertwining it with
That's
attachment theory.
awesome.
So,
Yeah, you're going to be the first.
yeah.
I appreciate you coming on and giving me and my little audience all these insights. Where should I direct people if they want to check out your stuff?
Yeah. So, my website, jessicadesilvacoaching.com. My Instagram is the Jessica De Silva. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
even on TikTok, Jessica De Silva Coaching. But if you find me on Instagram, it's the same content. Yeah, and all my resources. I have a podcast too, Let's Talk Attachments. If you want to dive into that some more, yeah. But all my content it's on my
Amazing.
website.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you again, and I'm sure I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.